Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Nicaragua webinar entitled SINAPRED, Nicaragua's Renowned Disaster Prevention, Mitigation, and Response. My name is Nan McCurdy, and I'm one of your co-moderators today, along with Becca Reck. We'll hear from our speaker in just a few minutes. But first, we have other comments and announcements. We want to thank Yoav Elenevsky for providing technical support. We also thank Dr. Arnie Matlin for monitoring the chat. The primary sponsor of today's webinar is the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. We also thank our many other organizational co-sponsors who will be listed in the chat. Feel free to use the chat function to offer comments throughout this event. We ask you to use it in respectful ways that don't distract from the program. Demeaning comments will not be tolerated. But if you have a question for a speaker, please don't put your question in the chat, or we may not see it. Instead, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and place your question there. We'll select questions from the question and answer to pose to our speaker. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to all registrants within the next few days. When it's ready, it will also be posted on the website of the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition, nicasolidarity.com, and also on its YouTube channel. If you'd like to become more active in supporting Nicaragua's sovereignty and opposing foreign intervention there, please join the International Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. You can check their website regularly for updates and new resources. That is at nicasolidarity.com. Also subscribe to the newsletter, monthly meetings, action alerts, and other notices from the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. See the link in the chat. The next general meeting is on Monday, November 10th. The coalition meets on the second Monday of each month at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Email the coalition for the Zoom link. Find the email in the chat. We're also putting other links in the chat to subscribe to the NicaNet email list and also to Nica Notes, and download ebooks about Nicaragua. This information will all be in the chat. And now we turn to today's program. We'll hear from the featured speaker, followed by a question and answer period. Please do keep entering your questions in the question and answer throughout the webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce Coleen Littlejohn. Coleen is an international development economist who has lived and worked in Nicaragua for most of the last 45 years. She also has working experience in Colombia, Chile, and Liberia, West Africa. Welcome, Coleen. You have the floor.
Thanks very much, Nan, and hello to everybody. I'm not a good speaker, but so I am going to read my presentation. So I hope you can stay with me. Nicaragua is one of the most vulnerable countries in Latin America. There are more than 2,800 critical points nationwide, referring to hurricanes, flooding, tsunamis, landslides, and volcanic eruptions. 30 volcanoes, calderas, and crater lakes extend for 290 kilometers in the Pacific region of the country as part of the Central America volcanic chain, contributing to these disasters. A well-known specialist in volcanoes, Alfred Rittman, once declared that Nicaragua is the region with the greatest volcanic activity in the world. During the 20th century, Nicaragua was affected by 90 earthquakes, almost one per year, and it's the only country in the region that saw its capital city, Managua, destroyed twice by earthquakes, in 1933 and again in 1972. When I arrived in Nicaragua in early January of 1980, evidence of the 1972 earthquake was still all over the place, despite millions of dollars of aid given to the Somoza regime. Managua city center was still full of ruins and places where victims had been vacated to, such as Ciudad Sandino or Nueva Guinea, places outside of Managua poor with no housing, no water, electricity. And that destruction was also evident in certain parts of Managua and other cities, which had been bombed by the Somoza region in its efforts to stay in power. The shift from a reactive to a preventative approach by Nicaragua's Army's civil defense was baptized by fire during Hurricane Juana in October of 1988. It struck the city of Bluefields at 217 kilometers per hour. That's 135 miles per hour. But only 3 people died in Nicaragua, while more than 300 people died in the rest of Central America, Colombia, and Venezuela, countries that were also affected by that hurricane. Bluefields residents were guided to safer areas of the city, but the 3 that did die had preferred to take refuge in a local church, and the roof fell on them. At that moment, I was in Puerto Cabezas, which is a northern city on the Caribbean coast in Nicaragua, north of Bluefields. I was accompanying a consultant of the European Union who had come to visit a project which supported the return of Nicaraguan refugees who had crossed over to Honduras during the war. It was thought at the moment that the hurricane would strike Puerto Cabezas instead of Bluefields. So the government had a helicopter sent to return her to Managua. And I was obviously on the helicopter too. And so I went home, and our organization, our neighborhood was organized so that I was my role in the neighborhood was to take care of the children whose parents were assisting in health and other public spaces in case Managua was severely affected. So that night I had about 12 to 15 kids sleeping all over the place, but I was up all night expecting the roof to fly off because of the strong winds. But it was the destruction wrought by Hurricane Mitch between October 28th and the 31st of 1998, which was the worst natural disaster in the history of Nicaragua and the entire Central America region. And that disaster highlighted the need for a specialized institution for disaster prevention, mitigation, and response. Hurricane Mitch was a Category 5 event on the international hurricane scale with speeds up to almost 300 kilometers per hour. It didn't actually reach Nicaragua, but it entered, but then left, but then it caused intense rain for 3 days, equal to the average rainfall for an entire year in the country. The hurricane remained stationary for several years around Central America, with the then neoliberal government taking no preventative measures to assist the population. And when it struck, the impact was devastating. 2 million people were affected, 42% of the country's population. 3.6% of all the homes in the country were destroyed or damaged. 500,000 people were displaced from their homes, 10% of the population. Schools, health centers, and sewage and electrical systems in all affected areas, if there was electricity and sewage, they were affected. And the Pacific and northern regions, cities were severely damaged, their structures. 70% of the roads were unusable, and 2,700 kilometers of highways or roads required reconstruction after the storm. Losses reached 1.5 billion, and the GDP was reduced by 50%. In that hurricane, 3,800 people died in the hurricane. This was during the Aliman government, I think, when the Frente was out of power. And of those people, more than 2,000 of them died due to the landslide of the Casita volcano, which is about an hour and a half from Managua. And that's where an avalanche buried 4 small villages under several meters of mud. The mayor of the area had pleaded with the then president, Arnaldo Aliman, to help vacate the population of the area, but she was ignored, causing the deaths of more than 3,000 people. On March 8, 2000, the government of Bolaños created SINAPRED, funded by international donors, NGOs, and foreign government financing. They were the basic support. The government didn't put much of their own money in. But when the FSLN returned to power in 2007, the Government of Reconciliation and National Unity began developing a proactive risk management system within SINAPRED, with prevention, mitigation, and preparedness actions implemented by the population and its organizations, with state institutions and the private sector to reduce disasters in the face of the multi-hazard and vulnerability that characterizes the country. The system's operating basis is a model that involves individuals, families, and the community, with effective decentralized interinstitutional and territorial action in the 153 municipalities of the country's political and administrative organizations. Beginning in 2017, 4 national exercises per year were institutionalized. So March, June, September, and December. We just are finishing off the one in September now. And nearly 2 million people participate in each exercise, including workers from all the country's popular markets, schools, health centers, government offices, more than 300 private companies and cooperatives, and more than 100 churches. And this includes the organized population of the country's 153 municipalities, both in the urban areas and the rural areas, taking into account the specific threats that have been defined in each territory. In this past September exercise, for example, nearly 9,600 scenarios were considered, the most important of which were those focused on susceptibility to flooding and landslides, considering that the country's rainfall intensifies starting in September, and it's been very, very heavy this year. This exercise was designed to address the impact of a hydrometeorological event, a hurricane that would hit the Caribbean coast of our country and penetrate the north, potentially causing flooding and landslides in areas susceptible to this threat. Work began on this exercise immediately after the June exercise concluded. To this end, a national video conference was held every Wednesday with the 150 community little offices of SINAPRED that are called COMUPREDs, and the municipal disaster prevention committees, which are on a town level, and the regional disaster committees called CORPREDs. This is important because it encourages the participation of community brigades, which are composed primarily of volunteer teams from residents of rural communities and urban neighborhoods around the country. In the same exercises, in some of these exercises, based on the proposed approach, more than 2 million people have participated simultaneously, with almost 1 million students, teachers, and administrative staff. And the same is true with the participation of the people in the country's health system, administrative staff, doctors, and even patients who are currently able to participate in the exercise at the time of the event. It's also important to note that each central government institution, each ministry, has a disaster unit, and each municipal government has a municipal risk management union, which forms a strong arm of the system. So SINAPRED's role is to train these brigades and provides them with the methodological tools, as well as instruments and equipment for disaster response through the Cruz Blanca and the United Fire Department and the Ministry of Health. SINAPRED also works with the Ministry of Education to get the message across to children, who greatly assist their parents in developing community and family plans. A community plan focuses primarily on identifying community and neighborhood risks, but not only on risk evaluation, but also on solution strategies. For example, identifying evacuation routes in the neighborhood and the infrastructure best suited to serve as a shelter or a shelter center. Identifying solidarity houses is a strategy that only exists in Nicaragua. These are homes owned by someone in the community who offers them as shelter for someone in danger. In this process, evacuation routes, safety zones, solidarity houses, and shelters are identified, and evacuation methods are also identified because it's important to know where you will leave, with whom you will leave, and when you should leave. The family plan is more focused on the family unit and is basically the same, but in the home, identifying the main hazards we face and what to do with the most vulnerable people, such as the elderly and children under 5, pregnant women, and people with some type of disability. This is very important because emergencies have no time or day. They can occur at night, in the early morning, or when children are at school. That's why the family plan identifies what to do if a child stays at school, or if they need to be picked up, or if they stay, taking into account the school safety plan. And each school has that plan, and it focuses on keeping children at school while their parents come to pick them up in case of an emergency. There is also a national risk management platform on SINAPRED. It's a website with a link to all the critical points in the country, which also identifies the health and housing infrastructure to the surrounding area. And all of these elements are important during multi-hazard exercises because the objective is to implement the institutional plans, family plans, community plans, municipal plans, and even departmental plans. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the results of SINAPRED's work to date. They've carried out the following actions. Over 635,000 family plans and 10,000, almost 10,400 community plans have been developed. In the education system, more than 9,000 public and 1,400 private primary and secondary schools have been prepared with school safety plans, each with 3 student brigades. There's 9,000 community institutional workplace and cooperative response brigades that have been organized and trained, bringing together just over 90,000 brigadista members. And lately, also 150 homes were developed to families by natural disasters in the municipalities of Tipitapa, La Paz Centro, and La Concepcion. Another point is that over 1,000 young people were trained in 32 workshops to provide psychological first aid. And then again, the 4 national multi-hazard preparedness exercises are held annually with an average participation of 2 million participants. And families, communities, and institutional plans have been implemented nationwide during the last 4 exercises, accompanied by specialized exercises. And in 2019, Nicaragua hosted the first Central America multi-hazard drill. As far as the municipal committees for the disaster prevention and response, there is one in every single municipality, 153 in the country, each with their own disaster plans. Their brigades, the 153 municipal brigades, are organized, trained, and equipped. And there's also an educational TV program called Nicaragua Linda y Seguro, Lovely and Secure. It was created with 289 editions broadcast within the National Strategy for Communication for Social Change and Behaviors for Risk Prevention. There's also a National Institute for Emergency Preparedness, which was created to train public servants in 62 courses and workshops. A mobile data center has been organized and equipped to back up information and support communication in emergencies. The National Risk Management Plan is operational online to support management at the national and local levels, and emergency telephone lines are open to the public at the National Monitoring Center, forming a national multi-threat monitoring network. And in 2019, the Presidential Roof Plan program was launched, delivering more than 743 roof plans to the same numbers of people to help protect them in upcoming disasters. And again, an average of over 17,000 community leaders are trained annually in all self-protection measures. Support was also provided for the execution of 7 mitigation projects in various municipalities across the country that were requested them. 5 comprehensive volcanic eruption response plans have been designed with community participation in municipalities and territories with strong seismic activity, such as Masaya, Talica, Concepcion, Cerro Negro, San Cristobal, and Monotombo, which are, all these places are not that far from here. And there's also the continuing studies at the municipal level of comprehensive risk management to design the mitigation and responses. It's also interesting that also 6 disaster operations centers were organized and equipped for forest fire control and water transport in the autonomous regions of the North and the South Caribbean, and also in Chinandega, Leon, and Nueva Segovia. Early warning signs were organized in various places, such as the Matagalpa River, the Ochomogo River, and other important river bases. During responses and solidarity support were provided to families affected by natural and natural events, affecting just over 650,000 people during the following events: Hurricane Felix in 2070, the Oriental Market Fire in 2008, the 2010 floods, the tropical depression in 2011, the Nagarrote earthquake in 2014, the drought in 2014, the Ometepe landslide in 2014, Hurricane Otto in 2016, the tropical storm Nate in 2017, and then the hurricanes Eta and Iota in 2020. And then the last one's Hurricane Julia in 2022. The proposed tools for risk management have been designed by SINAPRED and include a national response plan with a multi-threat and health approach made up of a guide for response plans at points of entry into the country, strategy for emotional care in emergency situations, administration manual for shelters, refuge sites, and solidarity homes, national protocol for international humanitarian assistance, development of the protocol for air emergencies and incidents. They're about to start designing a chemical weapons control law and its regulations, and also support for a national anticipatory action plan for the El Nino phenomenon. I think as a final point, it should be mentioned that much of the above would not be possible without the incredible infrastructure that the FSL government began to develop after returning to power in 2007. The country is united by modern paved roads and highways, communication via telephone everywhere, internet everywhere, which also makes responding and preventing disasters much easier. Emergency workers and supplies, et cetera, reach areas in hours now, not days and weeks. And rural areas now are closer than ever to a modern health system with more hospitals and clinics all over the country. So that's basically my presentation. And if there's any, I just want to say that it has been, as a person who's lived here for so many years, it has been incredible to see the shift in what I experienced in, the early years of when I was here to what, it's not people don't worry about it, but I don't really worry about it because that you're not alone, that there is a system organized to protect you at the neighborhood, at the municipality, regional and national level. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Coleen. That was terrific. Now we ask our audience to please pose some questions to Coleen. Go to the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, and you can just punch there, and there'll be a place for you to write.
I'll have to figure out, I don't see that, so maybe
No, we'll let you know. We'll pose the questions to you.
okay.
Here's a
Yeah.
question for you, Coleen. First question. Can you talk a little bit about the hurricanes Eta and Iota in November of 2020 and compare the government's response to those Category 5 hurricanes with the response of the neoliberal governments to Hurricane Mitch?
You know, Hurricane Mitch, there was hardly like any response. I was actually, when the day it was supposed to hit, I was actually on my way to Canada for a year. And when I arrived, it said that, you know, it wasn't coming into the countries because the hurricane actually didn't even come into the country, but all the rain and stuff. So by the time I arrived, I went directly to Ottawa where we were discussing, you know, because I worked for Save the Children Canada at that moment, so we were discussing aid for the country. But it was not sufficient, basically. What year? I mean, Hurricane Mitch was
98.
98.
October, the last week of October, 98. Just
So
didn't
it
stop raining.
didn't stop raining. It took years for the roads to be built. I mean, basically there was very little. I mean, imagine that, because that was when all those people died because they wouldn't even take them off the volcano areas where they lived, you know. So there was when I came back, because I did actually come back a few months later to see the situation, and it was pretty bad all over the place still.
And how does that compare with the response in 2020 to the two Category 5 hurricanes on the Caribbean coast?
Well, people were prepared, you know, and nobody is forced to stay in, especially nobody is forced to do anything. You choose. I think there was a couple of people who died, and that was because the hurricanes were back to back, and some people just wanted to go home, you know, onto their island or to wherever, and they were encouraged not to, but it's basically, it was their decision, and they died on the way there. So those were the deaths, because things were very organized. And then when you have the roads and stuff, you can get the shelters, you know, full of food. The people are there, the volunteers are there and stuff. So you just don't see that massive. You see the massive destruction, but you don't see the death. And because basically the most important thing is to protect the lives of the people. I think during that, if I remember correctly, one of the few deaths was a tree fell on a guy in a city in the north because it was raining so hard, and the tree fell on him. And there was like I think maybe there was like 3 deaths in the whole thing. But it's amazing the difference from.
I think there was somewhere around maybe 100,000 people that were evacuated prior to the hurricanes both times.
Yeah.
So that was a huge effort to get people to a safe place.
Exactly. And people know, you know, they do it. It's, you know, very few people would stay home, you know, and take that risk, you know, but it's not like, you know, the very early years, you know, when Bluefields was, well, although people did in Bluefields, you know, they did go to there wasn't shelters and stuff, but they found them safe places, you know, except for that church, you know. But Bluefields, I had never been to Bluefields. I only saw Bluefields after it was completely destroyed. And then the Cubans came and started building houses, you know. So it's, yeah.
Well, here is another question. How does Nicaragua's response system compare with other countries in Central America?
Mexico has a response system. I'm not sure how it works, but when you see I don't have the exact figures right now, but Hurricane Mitch, for example, the deaths in Honduras and part of Guatemala and other countries was very high, over 300 and stuff like that. In Nicaragua, no, because they don't have those systems. In fact, a lot of Hondurans, if there's going to be something like that, they cross the border when there's, you know, if they're right on the border, because they know that they will find shelter, like on the Rio Coco, et cetera. But it's it's not something that has been really developed in other countries as sort of a priority, except for Mexico.
Thank you.
Mm.
Becca, do you have anything else? Here's one from Cindy. I am interested in the participation in the exercises, the drills. In my nursing career, everyone looks at these emergency drills as a big drag and would do a lot not to participate. Are the people fundamentally different from us because there is less individualism?
I think that the people appreciate the efforts because they know that it's their lives that are going to be helped and that they're also helping. You know, I mean, this is a revolutionary government and people are, you know, people support each other in neighborhoods, et cetera. And even if you're not, you know, Sandinista, you do it because you know you're going to be benefited from it. I actually thought about giving a talk on this because of what happened in the United States. Like, why doesn't the United States have some type of a model that could have, you know, helped in the fires in California or in the flooding years ago in Louisiana or something, you know, like why should be considered a model for almost every country, developed or underdeveloped. But I remember that a year I was in Atlanta with my son. He was little. I had to pick him up at school, and a hurricane was coming. And there was no there was no plan or anything. I mean, I got in the car and crossed my fingers, but I luckily got him out of school. But there was nothing. The kids were just waiting there, sitting, you know, in aisles and stuff like that. There was no organized response to take care of them. But it should be a priority, especially in areas that are everywhere, not even just, you know, but in Nicaragua and Central America, especially because of the volcanoes, the flooding, and with climate change, you know, the change in the weather, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
There's maybe part of the answer to that question has to do with that revolutionary aspect that you touched on, Coleen, because it does seem like with SINAPRED, they encourage the active participation of people in determining their own destiny and being an active part of this. Do you think that SINAPRED's focus on community and family participation is part of what makes this model strong?
I think it is the base of the strength of the model, that people participate because they want to. SINAPRED is, you know, opens the door to all levels of training, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and now with access, more people having access because the whole country basically has electricity, you know, internet is, I mean, it's not the country of, you know, 25, 30 years ago when, you know, like, I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, I was on a little island off of Bluefields, and it was like internet and everything. I go, wow, you know, I mean, the whole country is covered by the technology that you need for disaster management, and it's an example for the rest of Central America, and also an example for the United States, you know, because of all of the things that have been happening.
Well, and maybe just to, if I can get in a little more personal on Cindy's thing, I know that these exercises involve an actual scenario. So they will have picked a scenario that is, you know, this volcano has blown up. Here is what is going on. And then they actually have people participate at all levels, on the municipal level and in schools, where you have the victims chosen. People will do fake blood. You know, you have this victim has a particular injury. Their leg is hurt in this area. You have to get them on a stretcher and get them out. So it's much more interactive than just stand up and walk out of your desk and go stand in the parking lot. I think that there's a lot of participation put into planning the drills, what the scenario will be, how it gets laid out, and particularly when you start that at an age of, you know, doing that in schools, kids get excited about that kind of a thing. And then we'll be more willing and more likely to participate. What I've also heard from a lot of folks is that they get the kids participating in schools, and they're the ones who go home and say to their parents, what's our family plan? Where do we go if there's an emergency? Who goes with us? And they're the ones who are pushing through the education in the schools, pushing the families to get their plans in place and be more prepared. So it's starting at a young age and bringing them up rather than being something that's imposed, something that is, comes from the impulse of people to protect their families and their communities themselves.
Yeah, and it also makes me think of COVID. Nicaragua and Sweden were the most criticized countries as far as how their response to COVID. But actually, I was at a conference in London, and I gave a paper on Nicaragua's response, and people were shocked because it was considered like one of the best in the world, because of, people preparing. And I remember people came, door to door, people came door to door to, see if you were been vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, just getting ready, and it was, it's revolutionary, really.
Any more questions from the audience before we end today's webinar?
There is a question here about the Cruz Blanca. What is that? I think the Cruz Blanca is just the national version of Red Cross here in Nicaragua.
Exactly.
And there's another question. Are there other countries that have implemented this model or similar? Do you know of other countries that are modeling their response system after Nicaragua's?
I'm not sure. I would imagine Cuba has theirs, but maybe have had it for a long time, because if Nicaragua is the volcano pain in Cuba and Haiti and all those countries are the hurricane, the really bad hurricanes. I mean, Nicaragua's hurricanes and volcanoes and stuff like that. But I would imagine that Cuba and has it. Venezuela probably is starting it, but no other country in Central America. Yeah.
Well, Coleen, do you have some last words?
Bueno, it's been a pleasure to talk about this. And I really did want to talk about it because I think, people in the States, it needs to happen there because with climate change and everything that's going on, it's more and more important that every country does something like this, because it is getting in the next probably 10-20 years, you just don't know what's going to really happen, but you have to prepare for what might happen as far as the rains or the droughts or the fires in the woods, et cetera, et cetera. So it just seems to be a system that could be maybe a little bit harder in cities, but like in the small town where I was born, I would, if you had good leadership, you could do this, and it wouldn't be that hard in the United States, But you just have to have the political will to do it. I just remember reading about after what happened in Louisiana and all these children, and some of the children were hijacked and kidnapped, and were found in New York and brothel type things and stuff like that. I mean, there was just and they knew it was coming, and there was no preparation. I think that was, and then the question of the Florida and well, everything, all those, it's obvious climate change is affecting, everybody. So we have to prepare, and it's just the priority that a government gives to its people, is ordinary people, because I'm sure the people with a lot of money and stuff will just, hide in their bunkers or whatever, but I think like New York City, the subways, the subway's flooding, or you can't live in an below ground apartment now because it's flooding and stuff. But nobody seems to be doing much about it, but it might, you can't wait until it gets too late.
Coleen, one more question came in. You mentioned internet access available throughout the country. Does that mean it is free? That doesn't quite make sense. Why do communicate with the population? Maybe it's so the government can communicate with the population for evacuations. Here in the USA, not everyone can afford the internet.
Well, I would think that the public institutions, the committees and stuff will be, I don't know about the individual thing, I don't, but internet is not free, but in cases like this, there must be plans because the communication hasn't been a problem. I actually received the very first phone call during the war in the 80s from Puerto Cabezas. The very, because it was a phone call to my sister-in-law, and then the lines were, shot down by the Contra a couple of years, a couple of months later. So, but anyway, but there's been a tremendous difference in the last 40 years in the development of the country all over the place, and especially in the coast. I mean, I'm looking forward to driving to Puerto Cabezas, when the rain stops. That used to be 6 or 7. I mean, in mud, the roads were all mud. It would take days to get there. So I never went in a truck, but you had to fly. But now you can just basically drive all over the place or bus all over the place if you want. Yeah.
So here's sort of a piggyback to the last question. I understand there are a lot of public hotspots. Is this true? I'll say that my understanding, and I've had the experience, is that in a lot of parks and public places, there is free Wi-Fi.
I'll also add to that as electricity has been expanding, the government has been expanding the electrical grid across the country to where we had, there were 53% of houses that had access to electrical grid in 2007. Today, there's more than 97%, 99% that have access to the electrical grid. As they've been expanding those electrical grids, they've also been installing fiber optic cable, because the government has made the choice that if they install the fiber optic cable, the internet won't be free, but another company will come in and offer that service. So that's a way of getting the fiber optic connectivity around the country. So now there's fiber optic networks all over the country, which means that, in fact, anywhere in Nicaragua, most places in Nicaragua have much better connectivity than many places in the United States. And people can connect to the internet with very low cost pay-as-you-go data plans for telephones. So they don't have to pay a lot of money to access that internet. What they also, though, for the national system, I believe that they have connected, they put out information on the radio, they put out information on television, they put out information on internet. So that's all very, very well connected. And then of course there's, like Coleen has mentioned, this organizations from the, the department level, the municipal level, the local level, and those people are all tasked with getting the information out to the point where I think that neighbors go find their neighbors and make sure that they got the information, so that everybody knows if you have to evacuate that it's time to go.
Anything else, Coleen, before we go?
Not that I can think of, but okay. Anyway, but anybody who wants to come down and have a look, and just come on down, and we'll be very welcome to share not only this, but also the other development advances in Nicaragua that are just not, taking the free healthcare, the free education, a lot of basic things that we could use, in other places. So anyway, it's, yeah, that's about it for now, but
Coleen, thank you so much. It was terrific. And to all of our attendees, thank you for your participation. And until next time, this is the Nicaragua webinar series.
yeah. And thanks to everybody for connecting. Take care all.
We state these facts only to let you know that those of us who are revolutionary, Pan-Africanists, is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.
Power to the people.